Okay, let me ask you something. What does the Holy Spirit actually look like in real life? I mean, really? Because for a lot of people, it's been tied to some pretty strange stuff. You know, people running around, shouting, doing things that just feel off, and then saying the Spirit made me do it. But is that it? Is that really what it looks like when God is at work in someone's life? Or is it something way more real and honestly, way more practical? So if we strip away all the noise for a second, the Bible actually gives us a much simpler picture. It describes life with God as a walk, not a sprint, not a performance, not some dramatic moment, it's a walk. And I like that because a walk is steady, it's daily, it's kind of ordinary, right? You see it all throughout Scripture. Back in Genesis, it says Adam walked with God. Later on, it says Enoch walked with God. And then one day he was just gone because God took him. But Abraham was told, walk before me. David said, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And then later, we're told to walk humbly with God. So this whole idea, this relationship with God, it's not just a moment, it's a lifestyle. It's how you live. It's your direction, your pace, your choices. And then you get into the New Testament and it says we walk by faith, not by sight. Again, it's a walk. So now the question becomes, okay, if this is a walk, then how are we supposed to walk? That's where Ephesians 5 really zooms in. It says, see then that you walk carefully, not as fools, but as wise, carefully. That word carries this idea of being intentional, not just drifting, not just reacting to whatever comes your way. It's like you're paying attention to where you're stepping. Because let's be honest, most people don't walk like that. Most people just kind of they move through life on autopilot. Whatever feels right, whatever's trending, whatever everyone else is doing, that's the path. But here, it's saying, no, don't walk like that. Walk carefully. And then it adds this contrast, not as fools, but as wise. And when you hear that, you might think, okay, a fool is just someone who makes bad decisions. But biblically, it goes deeper than that. A fool is someone who lives like God doesn't exist, not necessarily saying it out loud, but living that way. So when it says don't walk as fools, it's really saying don't live like God isn't real. Don't live like your choices don't matter. Don't live like there's no bigger picture. Instead, walk as someone who understands what's actually going on, as someone who sees life through God's perspective. And then it gets even more specific. It says, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Now that phrase, redeeming the time, it's kind of interesting. It literally carries this idea of buying something up, like grabbing an opportunity before it's gone. Almost like you see a window open and you don't hesitate. You take it because you know it won't stay open forever. And that hits a little different when you think about it, right? Because we all kind of assume we have time. We assume there will always be another moment, another chance, another conversation. But this is saying no. Actually, time is limited. Opportunities are limited. And the reason it gives is kind of heavy, it says, because the days are evil, and you don't need a long explanation for that. You can look around and see it. Now, there's confusion, division, brokenness, people searching for something, but not really knowing what they're looking for. So instead of pulling back from that, instead of avoiding it or looking down on it, this is saying that's exactly why you need to be intentional. That's why you need to walk wisely, because every day you're surrounded by opportunities to speak life into someone, opportunities to reflect something different, opportunities to show people who God really is, not through some dramatic display, but through how you actually live. And here's the part that kind of flips how a lot of people think. The reason we're still here, the reason believers are still in this world, it's not just to be comfortable. It's not just to gather, sing, and then go home. It's because there's something we can do here that we won't be able to do forever. And that is, reach people who don't know God yet. Think about it. In eternity, there's no more convincing someone, no more sharing hope, no more helping someone find their way. That opportunity only exists now. So when it says redeem the time, it's not just about being busy. It's not about filling your schedule. It's about recognizing the value of the moments you're already in, the conversations you almost ignore, The people you see every day but barely notice. The situations that feel ordinary but actually aren't, because those are the moments where something real can happen. And then it says, don't be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And honestly, a lot of people stress over that question. Like, what is God's will for my life? What am I supposed to do? But right here, it gives you a big part of the answer. God's heart. His will is that people would come to him. That people who are far from him would be brought near. That people who are lost would be found. So when you're walking through your day and you're interacting with people and you're navigating life, you're not just passing time. You're walking in the middle of something that actually matters. And the way you walk, the way you respond, the way you treat people, the way you see them, that all becomes part of it. So yeah, maybe the question isn't just, what does the Holy Spirit look like? Maybe it starts with something simpler. What does your walk look like right now? All right, so now we get to the part where everything kind of comes together, because after talking about walking wisely, redeeming the time, understanding God's will, the question naturally becomes how do you actually live that way? Because if we're honest, on our own, we don't. And that's exactly where this next verse steps in. It says, and do not be drunk with wine, which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Now that's an interesting comparison, right? Because at first glance, it almost feels random. Like, why bring up alcohol here? Why contrast being drunk with being filled with the Spirit? But when you slow down, it actually makes a lot of sense. Because what does alcohol do? It controls you. It changes how you think, how you speak, how you act. It lowers your inhibitions. It takes someone who might normally be reserved, and suddenly they're loud. They're bold. They're doing things they would never do otherwise. And most people listening to this, you don't need a long explanation. You've either seen it or you've lived it. You know what it's like when something else is in control. And that's the key idea here. It's not just about alcohol itself, it's about what has control over your life. Because the verse says, don't be drunk with wine, which leads to dissipation. That word carries this sense of waste, of loss, of things falling apart, like a life that's just slipping through your fingers. And here's where it gets a little more personal. Because for some people, this isn't just theoretical, and some of you, you've been there before, and you've had moments, maybe even seasons, where something had a grip on you, now where you felt like you were losing control, like where it started small, just a little here, a little there, and then before you knew it, it had you. And maybe if we're being real, you've started drifting back toward that, not in some obvious dramatic way, but quietly, subtly, like habits you thought you were done with, patterns you said you'd never go back to. And now it's like, well, it's not that bad. I can handle it. I've got it under control, but deep down, you know it's pulling you. And here's the thing, this isn't about shame. It's not about calling you out just to make you feel bad. It's actually the opposite. It's a reminder that God sees you, like really sees you, not just the version of you that everyone else sees, not just the version you try to present. He sees the private moments, the hidden habits, the things you think no one notices, and instead of turning away from you, he's calling you out of it because he wants to deliver you and not control you in a harsh, suffocating way, but free you. That's the difference, see? When something like alcohol or anything really takes control, it leads to loss. It takes from you. It breaks things down. But when the Spirit of God fills your life, it's completely different. So the verse doesn't just say what not to do, it gives you the alternative. Be filled with the Spirit. And that phrase, be filled, it's actually really rich when you dig into it, because it's not just a one-time thing. It's not like you check a box and you're done. It's ongoing. It's continuous. It's like being constantly influenced, constantly guided, constantly shaped. And the original language paints a few really vivid pictures. One of them comes from sailing. Imagine a boat out on the water. It's not moving on its own. It doesn't have its own power. It's just sitting there. But then the wind fills the sails. And suddenly, everything changes and the boat starts moving. It has direction. It has momentum. It's being carried somewhere. That's the picture. It's like your life is the sail, and the Spirit is the wind. And when you're filled, when you're open, when you're responsive, it's like He fills those sails and starts carrying you toward a destination. Not randomly, not aimlessly, but intentionally. And here's the thing, you can't manufacture that on your own. A sail can't create its own wind. It can only be positioned to receive it, and that's kind of the posture here. Another picture comes from cooking, and this one's a little different, but it hits just as deep. It's the idea of salt permeating meat, not just sitting on the surface, but working its way all the way through, changing the flavor from the inside out. And that's what it looks like when the Spirit fills your life. It's not just external. It's not just behavior modification. It's not just trying to act better. It's internal. It starts shaping your thoughts, your desires, your reactions, your character, so that when people interact with you, there's something different. And they might not even be able to explain it, like they just know. Something about you isn't the same. It's like there's a different flavor, a depth, a steadiness, a peace that doesn't quite match the chaos around you. And then there's the third picture, and this one ties it all together. It's the idea of total control. And this is where the comparison to alcohol really comes full circle. Because just like alcohol can take control of a person, the Spirit of God is meant to have that same level of influence, but in a completely different direction. Not leading you into chaos, but into clarity. Not leading you into regret, but into life. And this is where it gets real again, because you kind of have to ask yourself, what's controlling me right now? Like, honestly. Is it emotions? Is it habits? Is it pressure from other people? Is it fear? Is it comfort? Because something is always influencing you. Something is always shaping your decisions. And what this is saying is, what if, instead of all those things, you allowed God's Spirit to be the one in control, not in a forced way, not in a robotic way, but in a surrendered way, where you're saying, okay, I don't want to be driven by all these other things anymore. I want to be led by something better. And here's the honest truth. This isn't something you can fake. You can't just decide, I'm going to live this way and then power through it. Because the kind of life that's being described here, it requires something beyond you. It requires that kind of filling, that kind of influence, that kind of power. And without it, you'll keep falling back into the same patterns, the same struggles, the same cycles. But with it, things start to shift. Not instantly perfect, not overnight, but steadily, consistently, like a sail catching wind, like flavor slowly working its way through, like control shifting from something that breaks you to someone who restores you. And that's the real contrast. It's not just about avoiding one thing, it's about being filled with something better, something that actually leads somewhere good. So if that's what it means to be filled with the Spirit, if it's not about chaos, not about hype, not about some out of control moment, then what does it actually look like when it shows up in your everyday life? Because that's really the question, right? Like, if someone said, hey, the Spirit of God is at work in that person, what would you actually see? Well, the next few verses answer that. And what's interesting is it's not weird. It's not extreme. Like, it's not anything you'd look at and go, wow, that's wild. It's actually really grounded. It starts here, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. And at first, you might hear that and think, okay, so just singing more songs, but it's deeper than that. This is talking about worship becoming meaningful. Not just something you do, but something that actually matters to you. Like, when you're filled with the Spirit, worship isn't this thing you tolerate. It's not the part you sit through to get to the main part. You know what I mean? Where it's like, all right, how long is this going to be? Are we almost done? When does the message start? That mindset starts to shift. All of a sudden, worship becomes something you lean into. You want it. there's something happening inside you where you're like, I need this. And it's not just about music styles or preferences or how good the band is. It's not about any of that. It's about connection. Because what's happening in those moments is you're actually engaging with God. You're not just listening, you're responding. And that's the key difference. It turns from a performance you're watching into a conversation you're part of. And when that happens, something really important takes place. Because when you begin to worship, like genuinely worship, you're opening yourself up. You're putting your focus on God. You're lifting your attention off everything else. And when you do that, it's like stepping into the light. And when you step into the light, things get revealed. Stuff you didn't notice before. Attitudes, reactions, things you've been holding on to. Maybe it's anger you've been carrying around. Maybe it's bitterness towards someone. Maybe it's something you've been trying to justify in your own mind. And suddenly it's like, oh, and it's not harsh. It's not condemning. It's just clear. You see it, and then naturally you respond, God, I'm sorry. God, I need your help. God, I don't want to stay like this. And all of that is happening before a single word of teaching even begins. So by the time you actually hear the word, you're ready, you're open, you're not defensive, you're not sitting there going, I don't know if I agree with that. Instead, you're like, okay, speak. I'm listening. See? That's what worship does when it's real. It prepares your heart. It turns what could be a one-way message into a two-way dialogue. You've already spoken to God, and now you're ready to hear from Him. But when that piece is missing, everything changes. You come in late. You skip it. You treat it like it doesn't matter. And then when the message starts, it's like, you're not quite there. You hear something you don't like, and immediately walls go up. Or your attention drifts. Or you start thinking about something else. Because the connection was never established. So when someone is filled with the Spirit, worship becomes meaningful. Not forced. Not fake. Not just outward. It's coming from inside. And it doesn't even stay inside the building. It shows up in the car, at home, in random moments. You catch yourself humming something, or just quietly thanking God. There's this ongoing awareness of Him. And that leads right into the next thing. It says, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father. And this is where it gets real again. Because thankfulness is not natural, at least not consistently. We tend to notice what's wrong way faster than we notice what's right. Traffic is bad, we're frustrated. Something doesn't go our way, we're irritated. Someone says something, we replay it in our heads. But when the Spirit is at work in you, something shifts. You start seeing things differently. Not that life suddenly becomes perfect, but your perspective changes. You begin to recognize what God is doing, even in situations that don't feel great. Like, maybe you're stuck in traffic and normally that would ruin your mood. But instead, there's this moment where you pause and think, maybe I'm being protected from something I don't see. Or you look back at something hard in your past, something you couldn't stand when it was happening, and now you realize that shaped you, that grew you, that helped you in ways you didn't understand at the time. And suddenly, gratitude starts showing up, not forced, not fake, real. And here's the thing, nothing exposes the condition of the heart like gratitude, because in gratitude, it creeps in quietly. It makes you feel like you deserve more, like what you have isn't enough, like something is missing. But thankfulness does the opposite. It anchors you. It reminds you of what's already been given. And when the Spirit fills your life, that gratitude becomes more consistent. You start saying thank you more, not just to people, but to God. And it changes how you move through your day. And then there's the third piece, and this one might be the hardest to accept. It says submitting to one another in the fear of God. Now, that word submitting, yeah, a lot of people don't love that word. It feels heavy, it feels restrictive. But here, it's not about being less than someone else. it's about humility. It's about recognizing that it's not always about you, that you're not the center of everything. And when you're filled with the Spirit, that humility starts to grow. You become more aware of others, more willing to listen, more willing to step back instead of always pushing forward. It's this posture of saying, I don't have to win every moment. And it's rooted in something deeper, it says, in the fear of God. Meaning, you live with an awareness that God sees, that your life matters, that your actions matter, that how you treat people matters. And because of that, you start choosing humility over pride. You start choosing cooperation over conflict. You start choosing to value others instead of always trying to elevate yourself. And again, this isn't something you can fake for long, because real humility shows up in everyday moments, in conversations, in disagreements, in how you respond when things don't go your way. So when you step back and look at all of this together, meaningful worship, genuine thankfulness, humble, mutual submission. None of it is flashy and none of it is dramatic, but it's real. It's steady. It's the kind of thing that actually changes how you live. And that's the point. Because when the Spirit of God is filling your life, it doesn't just show up in big moments. It shows up in how you think, how you respond, how you connect with God, and how you treat the people around you. That's what it looks like, day to day. All right, so up to this point, everything we've talked about, it's been personal, right? Your walk, your heart, your worship, your attitude, it's kind of internal. It shows up in your everyday life, but now it gets a little closer to home, like literally. Because the next question is, okay, what does this look like when you walk through your front door? What does being filled with the Spirit look like in your house? In your relationships? In your marriage? And this is where things start to feel a little more real, a little more uncomfortable for some people, because now it's not just about how you feel, it's about how you live with someone else. So it says, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Now, let's just pause there for a second, because that word submit, it carries a lot of weight, a lot of assumptions, a lot of reactions. Some people hear that and immediately walls go up. But before jumping to conclusions, you've got to understand what it actually means. Because this isn't about one person being better than the other. It's not about superiority or inferiority. It's about order. That's it. See, in any structure, whether it's a home, a team, an organization, there has to be some kind of order for things to function well. And submission in this context is about choosing to place yourself under that order, not because you're less valuable, but because that's how things are designed to work. Think about it like this. Whoever sits in the highest position of authority in a country, they're still human. They put their pants on the same way as anyone else. They're not more of a person than you are. But because of their position, there's an authority that people recognize and respond to. That's the idea here. So when it says, wives, submit to your own husbands, it's not saying you're less than, it's saying within this relationship, there's a structure, there's an order. And notice something really specific here. It says your own husbands, not just men in general, not just anyone. Your own husband, the one you stood next to, the one you said I do to, the one you chose to build a life with. That's who this is talking about. And here's where it gets even more practical, and honestly, a little convicting. Because a lot of times, people have no problem submitting in other areas of life. At work, for example, a boss says, hey, I need you to stay late today. And it's like, okay, no problem. Adjust the schedule, make it happen, figure it out. But then at home, it can feel very different. A request comes from your husband, and suddenly it's like, why don't you do it yourself? And it's like, wait a minute, there's a willingness to submit in one area, but resistance in another, and that's something this is addressing. Not in a harsh way, but in an honest way. Because again, this isn't about control, it's about alignment. And then it adds this phrase, as to the Lord, which takes it to a whole different level. So because now it's not just about the relationship between you and your husband, it's about your relationship with God. meaning a part of how you live this out is actually connected to how you respond to Him. And that shifts the perspective. Because now it's not just, do I feel like this? It becomes, what does this look like in light of my relationship with God? And then it explains further, the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church. Again, this is about structure, about order, not about value. And then it says, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Now, that phrase in everything that can raise some questions, because it doesn't mean blindly following anything, no matter what. It's understood within the context of what's right, what's good, what aligns with God. If something is clearly wrong or harmful, that's not what this is talking about. But within the normal flow of life, this is about choosing to operate within that order. And here's where something really important comes in, something that a lot of people miss. Because many people think submission means agreeing. Like, I'm submissive because I go along with what's being said, as long as I agree with it. But that's not really submission. That's just agreement. Real biblical submission shows up when you don't agree. That's where it actually means something, because it's easy to go along with something you already think is right. There's no tension there. But when you see it differently, when you would choose another direction, and you still choose to align, that's where it becomes real. And yeah, that's not easy. That's why this whole conversation about being filled with the Spirit matters so much. Because this isn't something you can just force yourself to do consistently on your own. It requires something deeper. It requires that inner work we talked about earlier. Because without that, this just feels like pressure. But with it, it becomes part of a bigger picture. Part of a life that's being shaped in a different direction. So when you step back and look at it, this isn't about taking something away. It's about putting something in place. Order, alignment, structure, and ultimately, a reflection of something bigger than just the relationship itself. Alright, so now the focus shifts, because up to this point, it's been talking to wives, but now it turns directly to husbands. And honestly, this part doesn't get easier. If anything, it gets heavier. It says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Just as that phrase right there, it removes all wiggle room, because it doesn't say, love your wives how you think is best. It doesn't say, love your wives based on how you were raised. It doesn't say, love your wives depending on how they treat you. It says, just as Christ loved the church. And now the standard is set. And that standard is high. Because how did Christ love the church unconditionally and sacrificially? Unconditionally meaning no strings attached. He didn't say, I'll love you if you get your act together. He didn't say, I'll love you if you meet certain expectations. He loved first. He loved knowing everything. And that's where it gets real for us. Because it's easy to say, yeah, I love my wife, but then we start defining love on our own terms. We say things like, well, I provide, I take care of things, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But this verse doesn't let us define it. It defines it for us. Just as Christ loved. So now it's not about what we think love looks like. It's about aligning with what it actually is. And then there's the second part, he gave himself for her. That's the sacrificial part. And this is where a lot of guys, kind of overestimate themselves. Because if you ask, would you die for your wife? A lot of men would say, yeah, of course, no hesitation. I'd lay my life down. But here's the honest question. Can you lay down your phone? Can you lay down your time? Can you lay down your preferences, your comfort, your habits? Because it's easy to talk about a big, dramatic sacrifice that may never happen. But the real test shows up in the small, everyday moments. When it's inconvenient, when it costs you something right now, that's where this kind of love actually lives. And without the Spirit of God at work in you, it's just not sustainable. You might do it for a little while, you might try, but eventually you fall back into self-centered patterns, because that's the default. So this call, it's not just behavior modification, it's transformation. It's a kind of love that has to come from somewhere deeper. And then it goes on, it says that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. Now this part is really interesting, because it introduces this idea that a husband has a role in the spiritual care of his wife, but not in the way a lot of people might think. Some hear that and immediately picture sitting down, opening a Bible, and saying, okay, we're gonna read now. And look, that's not a bad thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not exactly what this is pointing to, because the word used here, it's not just referring to the written word in that structured sense. It's pointing to something more alive, more timely, more personal. It's the idea of a word that's spoken in the moment, a word that comes from being connected to God. And this is where things get really practical, because if you're walking closely with God, if you're in His Word, if you're listening, if you're paying attention, then when you're around your wife, there are moments where you can speak life into her. Not rehearsed, not forced, not like you're trying to sound spiritual, but real. You notice something she's carrying, you sense something she's dealing with, and you speak into it. Encouragement, truth, perspective, something that lifts, something that strengthens, and it lands in a way that goes deeper than just casual conversation, because it's coming from a place of connection with God. That's the picture. It's like you're helping wash away the weight she's carrying with words that bring clarity and life. Not criticism, not harshness, not silence, but intentional, thoughtful, spirit-shaped words. And here's the thing that doesn't happen by accident. You can't give what you don't have. If you're not spending time with God, if you're not in the Word, if you're not listening, you won't have anything to draw from in those moments. It'll just be surface level. But when you are connected, it changes the way you show up. You're more aware, more present, more able to speak something that actually matters. And again, this goes back to being filled with the Spirit, because everything in this section, it flows from that. And this kind of love, this kind of sacrifice, this kind of awareness, it's not something you just decide to do and then execute perfectly. It's something that grows as you stay connected. So when you step back and look at it, this isn't just a list of responsibilities. It's a picture of a man who loves in a way that reflects Christ, who sacrifices in real, everyday ways, who speaks life, not just when it's convenient, but when it's needed, and who is close enough to God that what comes out of his mouth actually carries weight. That's what it looks like. Not perfect, not flawless, but real, consistent, and shaped by something deeper than just effort alone. So maybe the real picture is simpler than we thought. The Holy Spirit isn't mainly seen in loud, dramatic moments, but in a steady walk, a changed heart, and the way we live with people every day, especially at home. It's quiet sometimes, but it's real, and honestly, that's where the power is. If this helped you see things a little clearer, you can stick around, maybe hit like or subscribe, only if you want more like this.